believes that constructive criticism is important. I'm not so sure I can see whether this is constructive criticism and whether it could have been relayed in a much better way than it has. Yeah,
because constructive's good, right?
Absolutely.
You can't shy away from that. But just a slam down, not the way.
No, I don't think so. And I mean, I guess, look, a winemaker wants their wine to be appreciated, and similarly, they would want to know if there was something that they could do to improve it. And so, why would you not be open to hearing about that? But that does not sound like helpful feedback.
Is there, Peter, though, is there ever a case of just ripping the bandage off, saying, actually, you know what, your wine is rubbish, and it's going to take a lot of work to get it better?
Well, I think you can say it that way, not the way that it was said. To say, look, here's some constructive criticism, here's something you can do to make this terrible product a bit better, is acceptable. But basically, this woman was just subject to abuse.
Hey, both of you, thank you so much. Tabor Khan, Peter Dunn, I really appreciate your time. I'm Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, bye.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, sorry from the Prime Minister, police and spy agencies for failings in the lead up to the Christchurch terror attacks. The Royal Commission finds our intelligence agencies were looking in the wrong direction for threats, and the police didn't vet the gunman properly for a firearms licence. But the Royal Commission rules none of their shortcomings would have stopped the rampage that killed 51 people. It's made 44 recommendations. The government says it accepts them all. We have reaction from the families, and the Minister now responsible for making sure those changes actually happen. In other news, the preschools, daycares and kindies swamped with norovirus, and Bob Dylan sells his entire back catalogue. Why?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening. Ko Kainwin Curtis, tōku ingoa. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Christchurch mosque attacks has found a series of failures ahead of last year's shootings, but concluded it was unpreventable. The 800-page report released today found that lax gun regulations allowed the terrorist to obtain a firearms licence when he should not have qualified. It also says the country's fragile intelligence agencies had a limited understanding of right-wing threats and had not assigned sufficient resources to investigate dangers other than Islamist terrorism. Members of Christchurch's Muslim community say it's alarming that the threat posed by right-wing extremism wasn't picked up by New Zealand's intelligence agencies. Responding to today's report, Abdigani Ali from the Muslim Association of Canterbury says right-wing extremism was poorly understood in New Zealand.
We do not want any community to ever have to go through the trauma and pain that we have. This report must lead to change. We have 800 pages of words, and now we need them translated into powerful action. This is a matter of national security.
Abdigani Ali from the Muslim Association of Canterbury. The Prime Minister, police and government spy agency have all apologised for the failings in the lead-up to the attacks. The government has promised to implement all 44 recommendations in the report. This includes further changes to firearms licensing, hate crime laws and the creation of a new National Security and Intelligence Agency. Jacinda Ardern has told Parliament of her commitment to the Muslim community.
Nothing in this report, nothing that had happened in the courtroom, nothing that we have done in this Parliament, or nothing we will do in the future of this Parliament will take back what happened that day. But I hope each of those acts takes us one step closer to justice and one step closer to change.
Jacinda Ardern. The Housing Minister is adamant no stone is being left unturned when it comes to fixing housing problems. A new report from Stats NZ reveals home ownership rates have hit a 70-year low. Data pulled from several sources finds home ownership rates have fallen across all ages to just under 65%. Almost 1 in 3 households rent, typically spending a higher proportion of their income on housing costs compared with homeowners. Housing Minister Megan Woods says the stats are not surprising.
We are the first people to admit that there is a lot more work to be done in housing. This is an issue that is 3 decades in the making, and there is a large program of work underway, but there is still plenty to do.
Housing Minister Megan Woods. Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard has apologised for comments he made last year, claiming a rapist was working on the premises. He made the remarks on RNZ shortly after the release of a report which revealed frequent bullying and harassment at Parliament. Mr Mallard later told reporters a worker had been stood down and a threat to women removed. In a statement released today, Mr Mallard says it was incorrect of him to give the impression that the worker had been accused of rape. He says he's sorry for the distress and humiliation caused and notes he has provided a personal apology to the man. Some Central Otago orchards are hiring close to double their usual workforce to cater for reduced productivity. CAJ Hollandia near Alexandra has 300 workers thinning apple trees this year. Its post-harvest manager, Jackie van der Voort, says that's nearly 3 times what they'd usually have at this time of year, as experienced seasonal workers are not available. She says workers need to know how to pick quality fruit that's the right colour at the right time. Ms van der Voort says if they miss orders or supply inferior fruit, it will impact on their reputation, the country's brand, sales and future orders could suffer. In sport, the Black Caps wicketkeeper BJ Watling is confident of being available for selection for the second cricket test against the West Indies. The second and final test of the series starts in Wellington on Friday. Watling, who was a late withdrawal from the first test with a hamstring injury, says he'll undergo further fitness tests tomorrow.
I did a bit of training last week during the test match and it seems to have pulled up pretty good. It was pretty much 95% run yesterday and no dramas.
BJ Watling. Meanwhile, all but one member of the Pakistan squad can finally begin training tomorrow. 53 of the 54-strong touring party have left managed isolation or quarantine today. The squad travels to Queenstown tonight, where they'll train ahead of their first match against the Black Caps, a T20 in Auckland in 10 days' time. The controversial rugby league player manager Isaac Moses is a step closer to having his registration cancelled. An NRL appeals committee has upheld findings that Moses breached obligations as an accredited agent back in 2017. One of the sport's most powerful figures, Moses' stable of clients, includes Warriors playmaker Cody Nokarima, former coach Stephen Kearney and last season's interim coach Todd Payton. And Tiger Woods' induction into the World Golf Hall of Fame will have to wait, with organisers postponing the 2021 ceremony due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Announced earlier this year as a 2021 inductee, the 15-time major winner will instead be inducted as part of the Hall of Fame class of 2022. That's the news.
An unwelcome anniversary.
Our experience today feels no different to the day that the eruption occurred.
A grim memory.
He has been haunted by the failure of the SIS to protect this woman for 30 years.
And a clumsy scheme.
I think it's the sort of thing that you could come up with, in a pub on a Friday night, but then at the Saturday morning you would think, actually, no, that wasn't such a good idea.
The whole story. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine breaks, patchy rain tomorrow, becoming widespread in Northland at night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy at times, occasional rain about the western ranges, spreading through Hawke's Bay tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country, also wided upper. Periods of rain, heavy falls possible, clearing Wellington for a time this afternoon, easing to isolated showers south of Whanganui tomorrow afternoon. Norwest gales may be severe about Wellington and wided upper for the remainder of this evening. Nelson and Buller, occasional rain, heavy falls possible about the western ranges, clearing tomorrow morning. And Westland, cloudy periods, showers south of the glaciers tomorrow. Showers also for Fiordland and for Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland expected to be often cloudy, isolated showers for Southland and eastern Otago. The Chatham Islands, low cloud or fog, occasional light rain. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Today's word is sorry, but will it transfer into actions? The first apology came from the Prime Minister, then the head of intelligence services and the police for their failings in the lead-up to the Christchurch terror attacks. A Royal Commission has found the police didn't vet the gunman properly for a firearms licence, and our intelligence community was focused in the wrong direction when assessing threats. But despite that, the report has found even if they were at the top of their game, they don't believe the gunman would have been stopped and would have been only by chance that the attack could have been foiled. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
When we set up the inquiry, I said I wanted no stone left unturned to find out how the March 15 attack happened, what could have been done to stop it, and how we can keep New Zealanders safe. Today we have answers.
After nearly 20 months and multiple extensions, the findings of the high-level investigation have been made public. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says there's a simple principle at the heart of the report.
Muslim New Zealanders should be safe. Anyone who calls New Zealand home, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, should be safe.
Police failed to properly vet references allowing the gunman to get a firearms licence, then purchase an array of high-powered weapons and ammunition. The second major failure lies with the security and intelligence agencies.
For many years, the Muslim community has raised concerns over the disproportionate scrutiny by security and intelligence agencies. As one member of the community put it to me recently, they could only assume that same level of scrutiny was being applied to those who may have posed a threat to their security.
The report found there was an inappropriate concentration of resources and a disproportionate focus on the threat of Islamic terrorism.
While the Commission made no findings that these issues would have stopped the attack, these were failings nonetheless. And for that, on behalf of the government, I apologise.
An apology too from the Director General of the SIS, Rebecca Kitteridge, who acknowledged members of the Muslim community have felt unfairly targeted by the agency.
We only are interested in individuals of security concern, whatever their ideology may be. And I do really feel genuinely, I understand the concerns that the Muslim community have expressed. And I know that it has been really difficult for them over the last few years, and that they have found some of the interactions they've had with my service difficult, and it has made them feel like they're being targeted. And so my apology is genuine today.
The third apology came from Police Commissioner Andrew Coster.
We unreservedly apologise that Police's administration of the Arms Act has not always been at the level the public would reasonably expect. Whilst the Commission finds that this would not necessarily have stopped the attack, we understand that we need to demonstrate to the public that we have learned from this event, and I'm committed to ensuring that we give this work the priority it deserves.
The recommendations span several areas but are aimed at boosting counter-terrorism capability and expertise, making agencies work much more effectively with marginalised or minority groups, respond better to hate crimes and represent New Zealand's ethnic communities. Ms Ardern told Parliament any future changes won't take back what happened on March 15th, but she hopes each act will take people one step closer to justice.
There is impetus for debate around the kind of country New Zealand aspires to be. Mr. Speaker, may that objective guide us in this House, but may the memory of the 51 who were lost, the survivors and witnesses, remain with us as we embark upon this journey.
National Party leader Judith Collins told the House her party stands ready to work constructively, but all recommendations need to be properly scrutinised. She says while some things could and should have been better, she doesn't want people working in security agencies to feel they are responsible for the terrorists' actions.
There is one person who is utterly responsible for the actions of that day, and that person is now serving a life sentence without parole. We always know that there are failings in any system and that people make judgment calls that sometimes are shown to be wrong. But there is one person responsible, and that one person is the terrorist.
The government will move on some recommendations now, including appointing Andrew Little as coordinating minister and setting up a new ministry for ethnic communities. Ms Ardern has also committed to setting up a new National Security and Intelligence Agency, but says that's a complex proposal that's going to take more time and consideration. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The Royal Commission's investigation into the March 15 attacks has done nothing to deliver justice for the lives affected. That's the view of the Islamic Women's Council, and Anjum Rahman joins me now via Skype. Thank you for joining us, Anjum. Can you just tell me, how has the Islamic community been let down here?
I think what we found really surprising is that the report does specify that there were significant failures with some systems, there were failures with resourcing, there was a failure of leadership, particularly when it came to public conversation around national security. They put in a recommendation to redesign the national security system because it had flaws and significant flaws. And we find it difficult to understand how they can leave it at that and not go to the next step, because systems are ultimately designed and upheld by people. They aren't just some magical thing that happen. People make deliberate decisions to design and uphold the systems that we have, and they have not in any way specified or gone into any detail about, any responsibilities around this.
So, Anjum, would you like them to identify individuals who should be responsible for this?
I think positions, possibly, and yes, I think they could look at general, ministerial responsibility, particularly, when that minute came out around sealing the evidence and submission of CEs and ministers. That was really, really difficult for us because none of that evidence has been challenged or been seen by the community. So their process was such that they did not agree to give anyone in the community security clearance to be able to sit in on some of those hearings, nor any ability to test or challenge any of the evidence that was put forward by those agencies.
The Commission says, despite the shortcomings and failings, it doesn't think the terror attacks, would have been detected or stopped. Do you believe that?
My understanding, and I haven't read the whole report, I've read a good chunk of it, my understanding is what they were saying, and I think they should have been clearer, what they were saying is that within this context of lack of resourcing, lack of public trust, lack of leadership, that what they had, even if they had deployed it, would not be enough. So the resources they had, if they deployed it in another direction, wouldn't have caught them. They talked about, I think it was Operation Solar, and the tools that were not available around internet activity and so on. So I think that it seems to me, and they can only clarify, that ruling is based on the current system, the current level of resources that those public servants were working under.
So the intelligence community, according to this report, was looking in the wrong direction in terms of threats. And in fact, they say there was an inappropriate concentration of resources. Why do you think that our intelligence community was looking at the Muslim community as a potential threat rather than potential targets and potential victims?
It can only have been based on overseas activities. There may have been some low-level activity here. They certainly jailed a couple of young people for sharing ISIS videos. So I think the other thing is that we were an easier community to monitor because we were smaller. If they had been basing it on overseas events, then there were also overseas events and significant events that should have alerted them to a rising white supremacist alt-right threat, such as the Quebec mosque shooting, such as the killing of an MP in the UK, the Chapel Hill killings, and various other events.
So was it unconscious bias, Ranjan, or at its worst racism?
Yeah, I mean, I am a bit wary of the word unconscious when it comes to bias, and it may well have been conscious or unconscious, but I do believe that there is bias. I think the report also talks in the social cohesion section about the lack of diversity within agencies. They have graphs there. They talk about the lack of diversity within leadership positions. They talk about the poor community engagement and the lack of value of expertise that communities bring. So all of those factors would suggest that there was significant bias.
There is a very clear thread in this report about the families. The families have continued to suffer immensely since the attack. Financial strain, lack of support for people who had non-physical injuries, wrong death certificates, cultural insensitivities around the way they were dealt with. This was outside of the realm of the Commission, but should the government be looking at compensation for these families?
We have always held that there should be compensation, that there should be reparation for what they have lost. New Zealand was not prepared for this attack. We didn't have the capacity, the capability to deal with a community like ours, or to deal with the scale of the attack. And so I think that, again, goes to that systemic lack of planning and preparedness. Certainly victims' families and those that were present on the day, all of those people are first and foremost in our thoughts. And justice and compensation is really all about them, so they can at least be feeling secure and have support for their well-being. Those are crucial for us.
Are you convinced that if these 44 recommendations are carried through on, that New Zealand will be safer because of it?
It depends on the order that those are carried out. So if you have that bias that we've talked about and you bring that to any system or structure in place, then that new system won't be effective because it still has those underlying biases with the staff, with the values, with the assumptions, all of those things. So to me, we really need to tackle discrimination. We need to tackle racism. We need to tackle that cultural competency and the diversity within our public services. That is the first piece, because you can't have the same people bringing the same values and expect them to get different results.
Intelligence services, the police and the Prime Minister have all apologised today. Does that mean anything?
To me, it did. I honestly, as I heard it on Radio New Zealand News, my eyes filled with tears. I think personally I needed to hear that, and it was personally very important to me. I can't speak for affected families. They will give their own account of that, but for me, to not have had an apology, given the findings of this report and given what we knew in terms of our interactions with government, I believe there was no other option, and I think it was absolutely needed.
What did it mean to you?
It meant recognition that things had not gone right, that things could have been done better and should have been done better. And that's a starting point, and a necessary starting point.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. That is Anjum Rahman, who is from the Islamic Women's Council there. It is 20 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We should have been safe here. The reaction this afternoon from the Christchurch's Muslim communities. The Imam of Al Noor Mosque, Gamal Foda, says he reported suspicious people around the Deans Avenue Mosque and is disappointed by the lack of action taken by police. He says the report shows there is institutional prejudice and unconscious bias in government agencies. He spoke earlier about the change he wants to see as the result of the Royal Commission report.
Our country, our team of 5 million, you have been our strongest supporters throughout. This kindness and manakitanga, this is an essential part of New Zealand culture, one that we are proud to call ours. You showed the world the best of who we are and who we want to be. You were there for us, and we were there for you, as thousands flocked to our mosques. And we held and received you with open arms and supported you to understand that we could forgive and we could trust. For we never lost trust in our country. But it has been a tough 21 months. We have gone through a lot, all of us, and we acknowledge that some more than others. This Royal Commission report highlights some of the strain on that trust and the importance of investing in building and protecting public trust for national security. This will take time and a collaborative approach where we learn from each other and share the strengths we all bring.
And that was the Imam of Al Noor Mosque, Gamal Foda. Andrew Little is the Minister coordinating the response of the Royal Commission report, and he joins me now from our Parliament studio. Good evening, Minister. To start with, what would you like to say to the Muslim community?
First of all, look, we acknowledge that today will be a hard day because this is about reliving, I think, some of the horror of March the 15th. To thank them for their incredible patience, their forbearance, and actually their input into the Royal Commission report, and then to promise that we will engage in that collaborative effort that I think Gamal talked about. We know that there is an effort required now to restore faith and confidence in government agencies, in government leadership, in national security issues, and we're determined to see that through.
And sorry?
Yes, the Prime Minister has apologised, the police have apologised, the SIS have apologised for the failings that the Royal Commission identified as a result of their inquiry.
And you, as Minister of those agencies, do you apologise too?
I echo those apologies that have been made, yes, of course.
Okay. Why was the intelligence community looking in the wrong direction in terms of threats?
Well, I don't think the Royal Commission concluded that they were looking in the wrong direction. What they said that with the resources that they had and with the decision making around what they should have been doing, there was an inappropriate concentration of resources on the Islamic threat, and to the extent that they'd started the work on looking at other forms of terrorism, it was not well advanced and should have been further advanced for that time in our history.
Is that in part because of racist attitudes?
I think what the Royal Commission talks about is that the way we had formed our kind of strategic decisions around national security is actually we had let a lot of things go. There wasn't a lot of concentrated strategic leadership. So we'd geared up and responded to the threats that were evident around the world and for New Zealand from the early 2000s, but actually in terms of moving that on and being relevant to other terrorist threats, including white supremacist and other violent extremist threats, we simply hadn't developed what should have been happening in terms of what the agencies were doing.
Did the government realise that these agencies were off their game?
Well, there had been a decision taken, I think, in 2016, 2017, following a strategic review of the two agencies, GCSB and SIS, to beef up their capability. That, of course, takes time. And even following the change of government, we continued to put additional funding into those agencies as they grew their staff, as they grew their capability and the work that they were doing.
But did you realise it was
as the report records,
sorry to interrupt.
In 2018, they started looking at other forms of extremist terrorism.
But did you realise it was as bad as what it appears to now be?
Well, I'm not quite sure why you talk about what it appears to be. The Royal Commission report was pretty clear about what they have concluded from what they know, and that is that although the agencies, and the SAS in particular, was gearing up to look at a broader range of extremist threats, that work simply wasn't well advanced, and it should have been had they been keeping up with, international measures of terrorist threats.
But did the government not know that, Minister?
Well, the government knew that there was work that was going on because that additional money was going in, and that additional money was to increase its capability and see it expanding, its role and its cover of a range of national security threats, but including terrorism.
One of the disturbing themes through the report is the ongoing pain and suffering, psychological distress suffered by survivors and their families, insensitivities around culture, wrong death certificates, people saying they were being re-traumatised. Now, the Royal Commission had no right to look into this, but the Islamic Women's Association says you need to start looking at compensation. Is that something you're going to do?
Look, what we're doing, and through the engagement we had from the weekend, we know that there's a lot of issues still for a lot of members of the community, the families who were directly affected, those who were witnesses, still not getting, the support that they need and getting their lives back on track. So the top priority is to address those sorts of issues and make sure that that support is there, make sure that the various government agencies involved in getting that support, ACC, MSD, others, immigration, are getting that support there. So that's my top priority right now. In terms of issues of compensation, I'm not thinking of that at the moment. My job is to respond to the recommendations in the Royal Commission report and from what we've heard from the community in the last few days about the support they continue to need, and I'm determined to get them that support.
But will you turn your mind to that at some point?
I have to say, in my engagement with the community, since they've got copies of the report, that is not an issue that's been raised with me. A lot of issues have been raised with me, but not that. So, look, I think there is a major priority in making sure those who were directly affected by this terrorist attack are getting the support that they need and deserve. There's also the issue about just getting engagement going, not just with the Christchurch Muslim community, but with Muslim communities around New Zealand and many other minority communities, to start that long process of restoring trust and confidence in government agencies responsible for our national security. That's my priority.
How can they still be waiting for what would be regarded as fundamental support so long after this incident?
Look, that's a good question, and I haven't got to the bottom of that. What I do know from the people I've spoken to, the people who've raised it with me on the weekend, is there still are needs that have not been met and that should have been. I mean, one explanation given to me by a senior public servant was that all the effort that went into in the months immediately following March the 15th of getting good collaboration between government departments all sort of dissipated as a result of COVID, and a lot of government departments went back to business as usual. We need to get back to the kind of support that was being provided in the months following March the 15th, so that support is there for those people who are still clearly needing it.
Well, there are a lot of people unhappy with the way that they were treated and the support that they did get. What do you say to them?
Look, I acknowledge that. I'm sorry that again they feel and they will be feeling let down by that. We have an opportunity now to work on that. I feel a responsibility to make sure that I do my job of getting the range of government agencies that can provide that support to provide that support. For those who were caused further trauma and distress by the coronial process, there is still a coroner's inquest that is not yet concluded, and a coroner will have to make a decision about what happens there, but that might be an opportunity, if it proceeds in the usual way, to bring those issues to the attention of the coroner so we don't repeat that mistake again.
I want to just go through a few things relatively quickly. This new agency, security agency that's recommended, is that going to be on top of the SIS and the GCSB?
Yes, I think, as I understand what the Royal Commission was saying, and in fact I engaged with them over it when they interviewed me, was we have the agencies who are they do the intelligence gathering and have all the means to do that, but they don't provide the overarching analysis and the product that goes to people who have to make decisions. What we lack, I think, is strategic leadership and strategic direction, and where the decisions get made there. What we need to do is to is to consolidate what we've got in various parts of the government bureaucracy to provide that, and then a single person, a National Intelligence and Security Advisor, who is advising the Prime Minister and the Cabinet on those issues, who was the peak of the system and who's providing that leadership.
A lack of resources have been identified in this report, so how much more funding are you going to throw at it?
Well, that's a further sort of examination and investigation we need. We know that the last government, the national government, accepted that the agencies were under-resourced. They put in a lot of extra resourcing over a 4-year period. We came to the end of that in June this year. We've been waiting for the Royal Commission report to see what the recommendations are. We will now work up and work with the agencies and obviously with Treasury on where we think further investment needs to be made, and work on continuing to build the capability of those agencies.
One of the key issues identified is a lack of diversity, and you're going to set up a ministry for ethnic communities. Will it establish diversity quotas for the public service? Because there seems to be, a revolving door of certain people in top positions.
Yeah, I think the issue is those at the front line, those doing the work. There is simply a lack of diversity, and I think the intelligence agencies will tell you they accept that. They totally accept that. They've started a program of work of as they build their workforce.
So a quota, Minister?
Of ensuring greater. I'm not sure. Well, I haven't been engaged in any discussions about a quota. We know we have to do way better, and we're determined to significantly improve our diversity dimension of our state workforce.
And what does significantly improve mean? If you don't have a quota, how do you know if you've reached that target?
Yeah, I mean, we could say, look, whatever the proportion of the overall population of this particular ethnic group is, that's what we should have. Actually, in some cases, we might need to do better than that. So I don't want to get too kind of blunt and crude about it, but there's no question we have. We need to do way better when it comes to the range of ethnic minorities in this country being represented in those frontline agencies.
So when we're talking about personnel, is it time for any of the people heading up those agencies to move on?
Well, I don't see a need for that. I mean, we've got a reasonably brand new commissioner. We've got heads of the intelligence agencies who have been in the job for a matter of a few years. They have led amazing culture change in those organisations, way more open than they ever used to be. But actually, we know we've got a long way to go, and they're people who I continue to trust as being capable of providing that culture change.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Andrew Little, who is the Minister coordinating the response for the Royal Commission report. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, in breaking news, fire and emergency are at the scene of a fire at Ponsonby Intermediate School, with smoke billowing across the city. Our reporter Katie Doyle is there and will cross to her shortly. A cleaning product may have killed coronavirus, but it's led to a massive surge in norovirus outbreaks in early childhood centres. The ministers of fruit picking visit an apple orchard in Alexandra as the industry struggles to attract workers. And in the biggest music deal in decades, Bob Dylan sells the rights to his entire back catalogue to Universal Music. We would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time now for the headlines.
The Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Christchurch mosque attacks has found a series of failures ahead of last year's shootings, but concluded it was unpreventable. The 800-page report released today found that lax gun regulations allowed the terrorist to obtain a firearms licence when he should not have qualified. It also says the country's fragile intelligence agencies had a limited understanding of right-wing threats. And the Prime Minister, police and government spy agencies have all apologised for the failings in the lead up to the attacks. The government has promised to implement all 44 recommendations in the report. Members from Christchurch's Muslim communities say it's alarming that the threat posed by right-wing extremism was not detected. Abdugani Ali this afternoon told a press conference at the An-Nur Mosque in Christchurch, right-wing extremism is poorly understood in New Zealand. And meanwhile, the Islamic Women's Council says the Commission's report has done nothing to deliver the justice for the lives affected. Anjam Rahman has told Checkpoint the security agencies were biased against Muslims and should have been alerted to the possibility of a white supremacist attack by overseas events. The Housing Minister is adamant no stone is being left unturned when it comes to fixing housing problems. Megan Woods' comment follows a report from Stats NZ which reveals home ownership rates have hit a 70-year low. The figures also show almost 1 in 3 households rent, typically spending a higher proportion of their income on housing costs compared with homeowners. Some Central Otago orchards are hiring close to double their usual workforce to cater for reduced productivity. One Alexandra orchard has 300 workers thinning apple trees this year, which is 3 times the usual amount. The orchard says the lack of experienced RSE workers means the new workers are less skilled. And a computer room caught fire at Auckland's Ponsonby Intermediate this afternoon, prompting a large emergency response. Fire and Emergency sent 8 fire engines, saying their response was needed to stop the fire spreading to other school buildings. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time now for business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, tell us about this one company that seems to be bolstering the farming sector.
Yeah, look, the Rural Supplies Company, PGG Wrights, and they've lifted their full-year profit guidance for the second time this financial year. It's now forecasting a full-year underlying profit of about $57 million. Earlier this year, they were projecting that to be around $52 million. And look, compare that with last year, that's nearly a 50% increase in what was happening last year. So what's changed this year? Well, they say all this positivity is being driven by strong demand for its rural and fruit-fed supplies. That's particularly in the horticulture sector, coming to a very crucial spring season. There's also been healthy trading of its livestock volumes. And I thought this would be of interest. There's been a lot of demand for rural and lifestyle real estate property, which is one part of its business. We've seen previous reports that city dwellers, city folk, because of not probably able to go overseas to go look at big overseas trips, they may be looking to go buy a slice of New Zealand, looking to rural New Zealand, snapping up property there. So the company's CEO says they will make a call about whether they return paying dividends when they put out their half-year result in February. But this is a company that received $4 million from the wage subsidy scheme. And it seems that there was a bit of a backlash when companies took the wage subsidy this year, then proceeded to pay a dividend out to shareholders. But I'm wondering how people would feel about a company returning to paying dividends, especially when they're expecting to make a 50% increase in their full-year profit on the previous financial year.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to the RBNZ, talking about LVRs, and this is bringing them back in March. Are they going to make any difference?
Well, by the RBNZ own account, they say that the reimposition of loan-to-value restrictions may only knock about 1 or 2% of house prices, which is probably not the sort of outcome that those people out there who've been crying for some sort of change, some sort of policy to address this, have probably been hoping for. But remember, for those listeners who may have forgot, that these LVR restrictions, they are about sort of ensuring the financial stability of our banks.
So it's needing you to have a bigger deposit when you go out shopping for a house.
Yeah, so look, when these LVRs do come back in, they'll return to their former levels that they were at back in April. So that means that retail banks will be limited to no more than 20% of new lending to owner-occupiers with a deposit of less than 20%. And for property investors, no more than 5% of its new loans can be to property investors who have a deposit of less than 30%.
Well, yeah, here's the thing, Nicholas. Isn't it just like they've, honked the starter's horn for everyone investors and home buyers to get out there before March when the LVRs get reintroduced? Would it not create more demand in the short term?
Well, that's exactly what I thought. I wonder if we'll see people there who are sort of scrimping and saving, trying to get that deposit together. Probably, are the type of people who don't have a 20% deposit, which is a significant amount these days, that they were probably hoping to get in while LVRs were scrapped. So I wonder if we'll see people sort of racing to the banks now in the run-up to March to try and, get their first mortgage.
Okay. Have you got some numbers for us from the market?
I do.
On a post-it note, no less.
I know, I've gone downhill, haven't I? So the NZX is up 64 points to 12,719. Our dollar is at 70.4 US cents, 95.8 Australian and 52.7 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. Emergency services are responding to a fire at Ponsonby Intermediate School in central Auckland. The fire is understood to be in the school's tech dome, where art and textile classes are held. Black smoke's been billowing across the city, and our reporter Katie Doyle is there, and she joins me now. Hi, Katie. What's going on there?
Well, Lisa, I'm probably about 50 metres away from this building, and I've seen about 15 firemen on the scene, and they are just blasting this building, which is completely black. There's glass sort of smashed, all the windows have been completely broken in. It's a pretty big scene here, and there are police sort of surrounding the streets and just doing traffic control.
Katie, are there still teachers and students on the grounds at this time?
No, I haven't seen any. I've seen a few sort of bystanders from the houses nearby coming out and having a peek, but no, I haven't seen any teachers or students.
What about flames? People who are watching us will be able to see these photos of the fire trucks and also a huge amount of smoke coming from the school, but can you see flames at the moment?
I can't see flames, but what I can see is a completely blackened roof. I mean, it's completely black, and the side of the building is also completely black.
Thank you for the update. That is Katie Doyle, who is outside the Ponsonby Intermediate School in central Auckland, where firefighters are trying to put out a fire there. And if you're watching us, or you can go to our Facebook page, we'll post the photos. There's huge clouds of smoke above the school. Home ownership rates have hit a 70-year low, and those working in housing are not at all surprised. A new 150-page report from Stats New Zealand titled Housing in Aotearoa 2020 reveals a grim portrait of the housing crisis. Our housing reporter Eva Corlett with this story.
The last time home ownership rates were this low was 1951, when they dropped to 61.5%. By the 1990s, home ownership hit its peak, but it's been declining ever since across all age groups and now sits at 64.5%. And if you're in your 20s or 30s or an ethnic minority, the figures are much lower. The new report from Stats NZ pulls together information on housing from multiple sources: the 2018 census, the employment survey, a pilot housing survey, to name a few. It shows how rising costs, supply problems, low incomes and more are contributing to the problem. The report's lead author, Dr. Rosemary Goodyear, says low home ownership means 1 in 3 people now rent.
We know that renters in New Zealand are paying a higher proportion of their income on housing, but we also know that rental housing is often inadequate. It's more likely to be damp, more likely to be mouldy, and to not have as efficient heating. So renters are also more likely to say that they feel cold, always or often.
That's 1.4 million people living in a place they don't own. Dampness and mould are more common in houses that aren't owner-occupied. Rentals are less likely to have efficient heating and more likely in need of major repairs. Dr. Goodyear says that's a lot of people living in places that are not up to scratch.
If you think about renters, they're working in the current market. With as homeowners, they could have bought their house yesterday, or they could have bought it 20 years ago. So they bought according to the market at the time, and so they're often less subject to the current conditions. But of course, if you're a young person trying to get into a house, it is getting harder, particularly the ability to raise a deposit.
Unsurprisingly, people living in poor quality housing were more likely to have health and wellbeing problems. Māori and Pacific peoples are close to 4 and 6 times more likely than Pākehā to live in severe housing deprivation. The General Manager at Te Matapihi, an independent Māori housing group, Wayne Knox, says the statistics aren't a surprise.
It really just underscores the fact that we need to take a rights-based approach to housing in order to, I guess, make the value judgment that we need to as a society to make some urgent interventions and also make some significant investment.
Mr Knox says even if Māori housing projects like Papakāinga were given double the funding, it still wouldn't be enough to get Māori into secure housing. In places like Auckland, the average house costs approximately 11.5 times the median household income. The report says that's good news for existing homeowners and very bad news for anyone trying to get into the market. Robert Whittaker is from Renters United, an advocacy group pushing for better renting rights. He says rents have also gone up significantly in the wake of COVID-19.
People thought there was going to be a sort of downward correction both in house prices and rents. In reality, rents are continuing to rise, especially in Wellington, Auckland and other overstretched markets. So if anything, the picture is worse than these numbers.
Mr Whittaker says renters are finding it harder and harder to find housing.
What we've been hearing a lot from renters is that their rents are going up $50 or $100 and they can't afford to pay that much and they're having to move on and look for somewhere cheaper, which may or may not exist. And of course the quality of the housing is not improving either. So people, there's been a lot of stories in the media recently of sort of some pretty terrible places for some pretty outrageous amounts, and that is kind of becoming the norm, unfortunately, in our rental market.
Robert Whittaker says rent controls must be introduced and security of tenure provisions and healthy homes policies extended. The Minister for Housing, Megan Woods, says that there's no quick fix.
We are the first people to admit that there is a lot more work to be done in housing. This is an issue that is 3 decades in the making, and there is a large program of work underway, but there is still plenty to do.
The Minister says the government is considering all options to ease the problem. But the Green Party housing spokesperson, Marama Davidson, says not enough is being done.
It's clear that people are finding it difficult just to find an affordable place to live in, let alone buying a home. And we've said all along that all the tools need to be back on the table.
Marama Davidson says that includes a tax on assets, prioritising public housing and looking at not-for-profit rentals. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, but really interested in your thoughts on the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the terrorist attacks in Christchurch. 44 recommendations. Will they make a difference? The reports found that the police made mistakes in vetting the gunman for his gun licence, and also that our intelligence services put an inappropriate amount of resources into focusing on one particular threat and not looking at right-wing extremism. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Amidst mounting shipping delays and safety concerns for staff, Ports of Auckland bosses have today faced a grilling from Auckland Council. There are 5 ships waiting in the Hauraki Gulf at the moment to be processed. On average, ships are waiting 8 days to have their goods offloaded. That's causing major supply chain issues, with increased demand before Christmas only adding to the problem. Today, the port's chief executive made a scheduled appearance before some frustrated councillors. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person was at the meeting and she joins us now. Nita, what did the ports have to say about how their performance is going this year?
Well, it wasn't good. Today we were hearing from Chief Executive Tony Gibson. This is the first time we've heard from him, despite Checkpoint repeatedly requesting it. But the Ports of Auckland are owned by Auckland Council, so he did have to front to them today. This was the first time he'd publicly addressed those issues they're having and described it as a year of real challenges and put that down to COVID. Obviously, the virus has had huge impacts on shipping routes, schedules, safety, quarantine. No part of the supply chain has been unaffected. And New Zealand's not immune to that. In fact, often those things are compounded by the time the boats get down here. But basically, Mr Gibson said the problem at this time is the unprecedented boom in demand. He did concede, however, and we've spoken a lot about this on Checkpoint, that their own automation system rollout has added to the problems. He said they've learnt some lessons and they have been harsh lessons.
So what were the council's concerns?
Well, it was a pretty tense mood there today, it would be fair to say. Safety and delays were the key concerns to councillors. As I mentioned, the council owns the port, but these issues go far further than Auckland. A lot of people and companies across the companies waiting for stock at the moment. Pretty frustrating to see those boats out there in the Hauraki Gulf with things out there that people just can't get their hands on. So Mayor Phil Goff was one of the councillors wanting to know whether all of these issues are down to COVID or whether the port's own behaviour was part of that. Here's his question to them.
If we were to compare the number of containers we were unloading on average each day at the current time, or say over the last month, with the same time last year, are we unloading more or less containers?
No, Mayor, we're actually loading less containers, but so less number of vessels, but much bigger exchanges, which puts pressure on the workforce. And of course the capability, and again, it's related to very high yard utilisation And had we had the automation in place now, we could have coped with the additional cargoes.
So again, that's back to the automation, the shift from manual use of cranes and things to some automation ones. It hasn't gone as smoothly as they had hoped. There also weren't any clear signs that these delays are going to get better anytime soon. The port basically expects things to be going slowly well into the new year. Something that was quite interesting that came through today, a letter that the Ministry of Transport had written to one of the councillors describing a government kind of review of sorts across several key ministries has been launched into how these the delays facing ships are actually happening and whether there's anything that can be done to improve that. So there is some work being done by the government looking at what's going on here.
Did the port mention staffing issues?
That repeatedly came up, that staffing was a problem, but some more staff are on the way, but again, no silver bullet there.
Okay, so safety is also something that people are questioning. I mean, you yourself were in sentencing the other day involving the ports of Auckland, so what questions were asked about safety?
Yeah, and councillors were well aware of that case. We reported on it last week. A young father who died when his straddle tipped over. So people quite concerned, councillors today, that rhetoric from the ports that they're taking action on safety isn't actually matching up with what's happening. There was another death there this year. So Mr Goff again asked about safety culture, and Tony Gisborne tried to say he wanted to have that conversation offline. Mr Goff did push him on that, and here's how that played out.
We've got in our statement of intent, a safe and empowered people. But what this report shows is that we fell hugely short of that. Now, I don't expect you to touch on things that are inappropriate to talk about in public, but I need to know, and I think everybody around this table needs to know, why there was a culture of disregard of safety rules and why that wasn't properly monitored and enforced. I think that is in the public interest to know.
I think, first of all, we accept that we didn't play a part in making sure that that young man went home safely. We, as you would have seen from the press statement we made last week, there were gaps in training. There were gaps in following up on tips alarm. And all I can say is that subsequent to that accident, which was very sad, we've got strict protocols in place around those very things. And what we have tried to do is also put front cameras and cameras facing in the cab to ensure that we can monitor that drivers are handling the straddle carrier in a safe way.
So Tony Gibson did say that productivity would never overshadow people getting home safety at night, and that was something they are still working on, safety at the ports. And there's a review underway by Auckland Council into a number of deaths connected to the ports in recent years. The first draft of that is due to be completed before Christmas, with the final report by February. So there may be more answers in there.
Thanks, Nita Blake Person. There's been a tenfold increase in the number of norovirus outbreaks in preschools, kindergartens and daycares in Auckland in the last month. Auckland Regional Public Health Services says there were 29 outbreaks in November, with 21 of them at early learning centres. The outbreak's been linked to a change in cleaning products. Hundreds of people have fallen ill and it still isn't under control. Kate Gregan reports.
Around 64 teaching staff and 280 children and caregivers from the preschools have been unwell after contracting norovirus. Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Jay Harawa, says all parts of the Auckland region have been affected, as the virus is highly contagious.
It's a pretty nasty bug, unfortunately. It is very easily transmitted from children to staff and then even back outside of the facility, so from staff to their family members.
Norovirus symptoms can include nausea, vomiting, diarrhoea, stomach cramps, headaches, low-grade fever, chills and muscle aches. Dr. Harawa says some centres with outbreaks have been cleaning with ineffective products, marketed as inactivating the virus that causes COVID-19.
A number of these institutions are using ammonia-based cleaning products and also using alcohol-based cleaning products. Neither of those are the recommended products for cleaning up norovirus-contaminated surfaces because they don't completely inactivate the norovirus.
But early learning services that haven't changed cleaning products have also been affected. Pauline Winter is Chief Executive of the Auckland Kindergarten Association. She says 2 of their students have contracted the virus.
We continue to have the cleaning regime that we've always had in place. So we're satisfied that we're doing everything. We know that our teachers talk regularly with parents in terms of keeping sick children home. And I think that's indicative of the fact that we've only had 2 children that have had the virus.
She has a message to families that may be affected.
It's not a nice thing to have, and so therefore our whānau are asked to keep sick children home, which they generally do.
Meanwhile, Jay Harawa says the outbreaks are not yet under control, with more cases.
Literally daily, so we've got another 3 in at the weekend.
He says it's not easy to get rid of.
Norovirus is a virus that's it's ever present in the environment, and it's quite hardy, so it will survive on surfaces for quite some time.
Dr. Harawa says the most important action to take to prevent the virus is to wash and dry hands thoroughly and often. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ahine, ko kei Gregan tēnei.
People in the UK will start receiving coronavirus vaccine jabs within the next 24 hours. It will be the biggest vaccination program in the country's history. Last week, the UK became the first nation to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is said to be 95% effective. But being first out of the gates has brought its own challenges. The ABC's Nick Doyle reports.
On a freezing, foggy morning, the Royal train pulls into Edinburgh Station. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge step off, beginning a 3-day tour to thank healthcare workers for their sacrifices during the pandemic. As exciting as the visit may be, there's a different kind of buzz among healthcare workers right now.
It's been, 100 miles an hour, working really, really hard to make sure all of this is ready for tomorrow.
That's Chris Hobson from NHS Providers, the group representing hospitals around the country. 50 have been chosen as vaccination hubs, and they'll start giving their injections tonight, Australian time. People over 80 who are already in hospital or attending as outpatients will be offered the jab first, along with frontline health workers deemed to be most at risk. Aged care workers will progressively be invited for appointments, along with elderly people in the community. Chris Hobson says it'll be a staged rollout, so people shouldn't be sitting by the mailbox.
Anybody who is over 80 really shouldn't worry if they haven't received a letter, even by the end of the month. This is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to take us a number of months to kind of get through. And the phrase I'm using is, don't call us, we'll call you.
Hari Shukla from the northern city of Newcastle just got a call telling him he'll be among the first to receive the jab.
And when I received the telephone call, I was very excited I got the opportunity. And so I'm not nervous or anything like that. I'm looking forward to it.
800,000 doses are being delivered from Pfizer's plant in Belgium this week. That's enough to vaccinate 400,000 people because 2 injections are required 21 days apart. Helen Donovan is from the Royal College of Nursing.
The key thing that we know from other vaccine programs is actually making sure that people come back for that second dose and making sure that we factor that in with the appointments that people are given because it's a 21-day gap between the first dose and the second dose of the vaccine. So I think that's the key challenge.
And that was Nick Dole with that report. Time for your feedback now on the Royal Commission report. This listener says, I must say Anjum Rahman is entirely correct in her multiple criticisms. The system and its goals are designed by people. And yet the report says nobody did anything particularly wrong despite multiple systemic failings in multiple systemic ways and at multiple systemic levels. They go on to say, how on earth does that work?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, ko Kainwin Curtis Tierney. The government admits the strategic leadership of national security was lacking at the time of last year's Christchurch mosque terrorist attacks. The 800-page Royal Commission report into the shootings has found a series of failures ahead of the March 2019 shootings, but concluded the attacks were unpreventable. It found government agencies had not assigned sufficient resources to investigate dangers other than Islamist terrorism. The minister now coordinating the response, Andrew Little, told Checkpoint the country's intelligence agencies should have been looking at a broader range of threats.
We'd geared up and responded to the threats that were evident around the world and for New Zealand from the early 2000s, but actually in terms of moving that on and being relevant to other terrorist threats, including white supremacist and other violent extremist threats, we simply hadn't developed what should have been happening.
The Prime Minister, Police and Government Intelligence Agency have all apologised for the failings identified. The government is promising to act on all 44 findings. The Islamic Women's Council believes the Royal Commission report does nothing to deliver justice for the lives affected. The Council's spokesperson, Anjum Rahman, told Checkpoint the Commission has let the community down.
They put in a recommendation to redesign the national security system because it had flaws, and they have not specified or gone into any detail about any responsibilities around this.
Anjum Rahman from the Islamic Women's Council. Renters advocates warn the rental situation may be worse than a major housing report suggests because it doesn't take into account the COVID-19 crisis. New figures from Stats NZ show home ownership rates have hit a 70-year low. It also says a third of householders rent and are more likely to spend more of their income on housing costs compared with homeowners. A Renters United spokesperson, Robert Whittaker, says rents have risen further in the wake of COVID-19.
Rents are going up $50 or $100 and they can't afford to pay that much and they're having to move on and look for somewhere cheaper, which may or may not exist. And of course the quality of the housing is not improving either. So people, there's been a lot of stories in the media recently of sort of some pretty terrible places for some pretty outrageous amounts, and that is kind of becoming the norm, unfortunately, in our rental market.
Renters United spokesperson Robert Whittaker. A computer room has caught fire at Auckland's Ponsonby Intermediate, prompting a large emergency response. Fire and Emergency have sent 8 fire engines after getting calls at 4:30 this afternoon. Smoke can be seen and smelt across several parts of Auckland. Witness Duncan Shand says the flames reached about 5 metres high.
How fast fire spreads is pretty frightening. It probably took maybe 10 minutes and there was flames 10, 20 feet high above the building. It was, really, really on fire.
Duncan Shand says the fire appears to be contained, but the school building's roof is gutted. 2 men have been arrested and charged with murder following a fatal East Auckland house fire. The blaze in Cockle Bay on October the 20th left 27-year-old Wiremu Arapo dead and 2 other people injured. The police say 2 men, both aged 32, are due to appear in Manukau District Court tomorrow. There are fears the coronavirus crisis will peak in the US next month. America is currently seeing more new cases, more deaths and more hospitalisations than ever before. An average of more than 2,000 Americans are dying every day. The infectious diseases expert Anthony Fauci says the inaction of the government and many states will lead to that figure rising further.
We don't mitigate well. We don't listen to the public health measures that we need to follow, that we could start to see things really get bad in the middle of January. So I think without substantial mitigation, the middle of January can be a really dark time for us.
There have now been about 15 million total coronavirus cases in the US. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, 6 new cases of COVID-19 were confirmed in managed isolation today. It's 4 minutes past 6. The Christchurch City Council has purchased a site near Akaroa in Bay of Banks Peninsula, described as nationally significant and of immense importance to local Māori. The council paid $2.5 million for the Red House at Takapūneke, which will be incorporated into a reserve. In 1830, the Takapūneke rangatira was lured onto a British ship and later killed by Kapiti chief Te Rauparaha, who then slaughtered many at the once thriving Ngai Tahu Commercial Centre. Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell wants the site acknowledged as being significant as the Waitangi Treaty grounds. The first pilot, confirmed to have broken the speed of sound barrier, Chuck Yeager, has died at 97. The feat was depicted in the 1983 film The Right Stuff, based on Tom Wolfe's book, where he was portrayed by actor Sam Shepard. After 1947, the American went on to break several other speed and altitude records. In sport, the West Indies fast bowler Kemar Roach and wicketkeeper Shane Darrich have been ruled out of the second cricket test against New Zealand. Roach was returning home to be with family after his father died shortly before the first test in Hamilton. Darrich suffered a finger injury on the first day of the match and didn't bat in either innings, but the team says he's being released for personal reasons. Top-order batsman Shimron Hetmyer, who's still undergoing concussion protocols, is also doubtful for selection for the second test starting in Wellington on Friday. Portia Woodman remains set on representing New Zealand at both the Olympic Games and Rugby World Cup next year. The 29-year-old has picked up the Women's Sevens Player of the Decade and Sevens Try of the Decade prizes and has also been named in the 15s Team of the Decade at World Rugby's virtual Decade of the Year Awards. Woodman says the postponement of the Tokyo Olympics until next year has worked in her favour.
It allowed me a bit of time to get myself in a better condition, given another 12 months of training and preparing. I'm really excited for that challenge. I'll definitely put my hand up for that, and then hopefully with two programs we can work out on how we can try out for the World Cup as well afterwards.
Portia Woodman. An Argentine senator wants to put Diego Maradona's image on a banknote. A proposal has been presented to Congress to get the late football legend's face on one side of a 1,000 peso note and an image of his famous Hand of God goal on the other. Maradona died late last month, aged 60. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, I speak to the UK MP for Rantha Valley, Chris Bryant, about his new book, The Glamour Boys, the secret story of the rebels who fought for Britain to defeat Hitler. Song Crush host Tony Stamp is joined by the founder of music agency Banished Music, Ruben Bonner, and RNZ's Yanatanahu Owen to check out new tunes from Anna Coddington, Mara TK, Brown Boy Magic and more, and how to put the hospitality back into hospital food. That's Nights with Karen Hay in for Brian Crump after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, fine breaks, patchy rain tomorrow, becoming widespread in Northland at night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy at times, occasional rain about the western ranges, spreading through Hawke's Bay tomorrow afternoon. For Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country, also Waited Upper, periods of rain, heavy falls possible, clearing for Wellington for a time this evening, easing to isolated showers south of Whanganui tomorrow afternoon. Northwest gales may be severe about Wellington and Waited Upper. Nelson and Buller, occasional rain, heavy falls possible about the western ranges, but that should clear tomorrow morning. For Westland, expect cloudy periods with showers south of the glaciers tomorrow. For Fiordland, also showers. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, often cloudy, a few showers for Southland and eastern Otago. And the Chatham Islands, low cloud or fog, occasional light rain. It's 9 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A man who was shot 9 times during the Christchurch terror attack believes it was preventable and the Royal Commission of Inquiry findings prove so. The Commission's report found lax practices for firearms licensing meant the terrorist was able to obtain a firearms licence without having close family interviewed by vetting agents. Instead, a friend who he met on a gaming website was able to act as a referee. Sally Murphy reports.
Police joined the chorus of apologies in the wake of the Royal Commission's findings today, admitting failures in the administration of the firearms licensing system. Tamal Atakoju, who was shot 9 times during the attack, believes the massacre could have been prevented.
I believe this has happened because of some mistakes and it could be stopped long time ago. When we find out the terrorist is injured himself, maybe it can be stopped then and save many of lives.
Mr Atakoju says the fact the terrorist could get a gun licence a matter of weeks after coming to New Zealand doesn't make sense.
If the name is Mohammed, can he get it easy? I'm sure lots of intelligence service knock his door middle of the night and ask him, are you ISIS?
He says the apology from the Prime Minister is appreciated, but he would also like an apology from police and intelligence services in person. Shaham Al-Safiti, whose husband Abdul was killed at Al-Noor Mosque, says the gunman should have never been given a firearms licence.
I think to this point, I think that there were holes and some shortcoming in the system. So we need in the future, and the recommendation says that they are going to look at it, and we need to make sure that this is implemented and improved in the future to ensure that this will not happen to any community. We want to maintain and ensure safety of all of us as New Zealanders.
Mrs. Alasafiti, who is still digesting the information from the report, says she has been overwhelmed with the support she's received.
To be honest, from day one, Jacinda Ardern, the government, people in general of New Zealand, they were very supportive. The help that we've got was actually, it's more than what we expected.
The Commission's report found security agencies had an inappropriate concentration of resources towards the Muslim community. Christchurch Muslim community member Tony Green says over the past 20 years, Muslims have been vilified, stereotyped and labelled.
The Commission said the GCSB informed us that in the second quarter of the 2018-2019 financial year, it received 7,256 intelligence reports from international partners about terrorism and violent extremism. None of those reports related to right-wing extremism. None of them. 7,256.
Mr Green hopes this is a wake-up call for government agencies to look at all threats, not just at certain religions or ethnicities. Victims and families will be meeting with government ministers in mid-January to discuss the report further and look at what can be done to prevent another attack from ever happening again. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
A survivor of the mass shooting says the greatest gift people can give his martyred wife is to learn a lesson from hate and make this country a safer place for all. Fareed Ahmed's wife, Husna, was among the 51 killed in the shooting rampage in March last year. I spoke to Fareed as he was making his way through the dense volumes of the report's findings.
It's a huge thing, but, I'm just, putting my eyes on a few things that, that I feel most important with my philosophy. For example, page number 760, it says that we all have a role making New Zealand safe and inclusive. So when I got the report, my mind was, my heart and emotion, and my mind was focused on that. What am I going to do? What is my role? And what can I do that will, show honor and respect to my wife? What can I continue doing that will make her happy, and, she will be happy from the other part of the world, with her soul. So that sort of things are still focused in my mind, and I'm trying to focus on this, that what can I do.
Fareed, you have spoken repeatedly about peace and forgiveness, but there are a lot of shortcomings that are highlighted in this report, and I'm wondering, does any of it make you angry, or does it upset you, these mistakes and shortcomings?
No, it does not upset me, because, I have a philosophy. I start anything with thanks before I complain for anything. I try to look at the positive things, and if there is shortcomings, it is not the end of the world. As long as we have, goodwill, heart, and good mind, good heart, we can work on it. But look, the amount of work, the amount of hours, was invested to write this report, and lots of submissions, and in the support from the government, the support from all Kiwis, they have also invested their heart and soul and their love and support in this, to go ahead, and supporting an independent inquiry so that we will find out, what has happened and how can we progress and how can we will be safe in this country. When I look at those things, my heart says that I must start with saying thank you for this wonderful work. Thank you for all these wonderful contributions. And then, the second thing I do, I pick up the positive things, and then I say that let us start. Let us start on the positive things, and if there is any shortcomings, that is not the end of the world. We can keep learning and we can keep contributing ideas, because basically we have one common goal, and that is we all want to have a safer New Zealand for each and every Kiwi.
When you say, Farid, that we all have a part to play,
yes.
What is our part?
This 15th of March, the way I look at it, it was not just an attack on Muslim, but it was attack on our peaceful soil, in our integrity, in our culture of diversity, in our national security, and in our beautiful image, peaceful image of New Zealand, in front of the world. So that is why, it has affected everyone. It has moved every Kiwis, and we have seen that from the reaction. After 15th of March, the reaction was all Kiwis come united. They replaced one hate by millions of love. And also, they all are united in one thing, that we all want to have a better New Zealand. So that's why, it is a thing for, entire New Zealand. So I believe that New Zealanders, they are together in one thing, that we want safety and security for each and every Kiwis in this land. And that way, Muslim will be safe, Buddhist will be safe, believer will be safe, or people who do not have any faith, they will be safe, because we are human first, and we have to be united on humanity.
Farid, would you like to acknowledge your wife today?
I always acknowledge her, and I would say that New Zealanders have given lots of gifts to my wife, but what would be the most important gift to her? And that would be if my wife and also 50 other martyred, their soul will be very happy, and they will take this gift very seriously if they see that we have learned the lesson from hate. And if we can work hard to turn that hate into love and unity in love in New Zealand, and we prevent any loss of life, that would be the most wonderful gift to my wife and to all others. And I believe in that, and that's why I am doing my part, even the little whatever I can do, for building a inclusive society, a safe society, spreading the message of love and peace. And I will beg to New Zealanders to give my wife that gift, that let us work hard, make New Zealand safe for each and every home, and we get rid of the domestic violence, and we love and care for one another, and together we prevent any life loss. And I beg for that gift for my wife, because I believe she will be very happy, and all other martyred people will be very happy.
Farid Ahmed. Central Otago orchard owners say the push for workers isn't over as they prepare for harvest season. Today, government ministers visited an apple orchard near Alexandra to speak with workers and growers. Tess Brunton was there and filed this report.
23-year-old Luke Condon relocated from Christchurch to work in orchards in central Otago and is currently thinning apple trees at CAJ Hollandia. It all started with a Ministry of Social Development program aimed to encourage people to pick up seasonal work. He says his future looks a lot brighter now, with plans to go to university.
What I'll be doing? Probably nothing, I'm going to be honest. Before this, I was just sitting around. Like I said, I've got a problem with my back, so it's difficult for me to find work personally. Yeah, I would have just been sitting around wasting time on the benefit. Probably wouldn't have even been organising going to university. This has been a very good push for me because I'm surrounded by people who also want to move their lives forward, and so it's a good way to motivate myself.
Orchard hand Benjamin Johnstone was on MSD's Limited Service Volunteers course, aimed to help get people off the benefit and into work. Before relocating from Christchurch in October, he had no plans for fruit picking.
Absolutely not. Prior to LSV, I had never displayed an interest in the horticultural industry, and to be honest, I only came down because I really needed the money.
CAJ Hollandia Operations Manager Chris Hull is pleasantly surprised how many workers they've hired.
We were very lucky that we were first cab off the rank. Apple thinning starts before cherry harvest, so really from mid-November onwards we were looking at recruiting, and a lot of people have been available to come in and work with us from that point forward.
CAJ Hollandia Post-Harvest Manager Jackie Vandervoort says they have 300 workers, nearly 3 times what they'd usually have at this time of the year, due to reduced productivity as experienced RSE workers aren't available. Many of their workers usually move on to harvesting summer fruit, but she's worried how many will return for their peak season from early March.
The workforce doesn't exist. We're in a region that doesn't have an urban town next to it with a workforce, so we have to bring into our district, and the people right now, that at the moment they're there, but we're very nervous about when we get to our harvest that those people won't be there. We know we won't have the students, we know we won't have the school children, but who will fill the void? So we're nervous.
Workers need to pick quality fruit that's the right colour at the right time. Jackie Vandervoort says if that doesn't happen and they miss orders or supply inferior fruit, it will impact on their reputation, the country's brand, sellability, and future orders could suffer.
If we don't harvest, if we do a 50% harvest, we've already spent all our money getting to the point of harvest. If we only harvest half the crop, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. It's not going to be a great result. Some will be able to get through that, but not everybody will.
The ministers made no announcements today, instead using the time to speak with orchard growers, workers and staff hirers. About 2,000 additional RSE workers are allowed into the country early next year. But Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy acknowledged that's shy of the roughly 3,500 workers growers asked for. He says there are reports of people leaving hospitality jobs ahead of summer to work in orchards.
We have heard a little bit of that from the likes of Queenstown, that some of the hospitality sector is finding it difficult because those who may have been coming to the end of a working holiday visa all of a sudden can get that extended to go and work and pick fruit or do some pruning. So that is another challenge. Again, because in the COVID world we have to respond to those things. We're looking at those settings all the time because in one place you can solve a problem, but then another problem pops up somewhere else. So we're constantly working on those issues with the likes of the visa settings as well.
Social Development and Employment Minister Carmel Sepuloni says the government has created incentives to fill orchard roles.
But even if we look at the 5K to relocate grant that's available, I think we've had double this year than what was granted last year. We've increased that amount so that we are encouraging New Zealanders to move to where the work is. And recently we announced the additional funding to incentivise people to take up the work as well as to support with accommodation.
Surrounded by apple trees with chickens underfoot, Luke Condon hopes more New Zealanders will join the push to pick and pack fruit this summer.
It's a good way to just get work because they're not allowed to get anyone in. They really are just looking for a lot of New Zealanders to start working for them, and really is just a pretty good opportunity for us.
Luke is contracted for about 9 weeks with Seasonal Solutions, but is extending his time to the end of January and hopes to return to the orchards next season. In Alexandra for Checkpoint, Ko Tasbrunton, Tēnei.
The Whakatane region is expecting a bumper summer as Kiwis holiday at home and explore their own backyard. While businesses directly affected by the Whakaari eruption have taken a big financial hit, others say with New Zealanders holidaying at home, they're busier than ever. Here's our reporter Sarah Robson.
You can't miss the turn-off to Julian's berry farm as you're driving into Whakatane. The big red and green sign, the groups of people out picking berries.
We just had a busy weekend and a lot of fruit has come off the vines over the weekend, so our picking schedule's a bit light today. So we're taking the opportunity to do a bit of maintenance. We've got 3 broken posts here. So much fruit hanging on those vines and everything's breaking.
That's Paul Julian. He owns and runs Julian's berry farm with his wife Monica. We're out amongst the berries with one of his staff, Sam. He's the one fixing the fence posts. Despite the dire economic predictions for Whakatane in the aftermath of the Whakaari eruption and COVID-19, Paul says the town is humming.
Post-COVID, the traffic in Whakatane has been at like summer levels, and we're not at summer yet. And our business, our numbers are as good as ever. We've always had constant growth, but they are significant, they are strong, very strong. Just New Zealanders staying and travelling in New Zealand, I think, are quite a powerful economic group.
So summer could be your best summer yet?
It's looking like it.
Paul Julian says he had been worried about a lack of staff heading into the berry picking season with no international backpackers, but that hasn't come to fruition.
We're certainly not desperate for staff. We're between university students, school students, random people. It's fine, completely fine.
Down at the wharf in town, there's a bit of a sea breeze when I meet Kenny McCracken from KG Kayaks and Mighty Motu Bike Tours. He says 2020 has certainly been a challenging year with plenty of bumps along the road.
I think if I look back to the 26th of February or 27th, I think it might be, when I was out at Motuhora with a group of Americans and we were talking about this virus that was appearing on everyone's horizon. I don't think anyone foresaw exactly how that was about to play out for the next 9 months.
But domestic visitors have always been the biggest tourism market for this part of the Bay of Plenty. In 2019, they made up 80% of the total visitor spend. And that gives Kenny McCracken reason to be optimistic, especially heading into summer.
For a lot of people, and this is what we certainly found in the last 6 months, or since we've all been able to move around, is that a lot of people are coming here because it's one of those places they've never been to before. And I'm hoping that we're creating such a positive impression that they won't just be one-off visitors, they'll actually return.
The signs are good already.
We also run a bed and breakfast cottage, and we've been inundated with inquiries to the point where we keep it closed because we can't possibly clean that much. So, nor can we find a cleaner. So look, anyone out there wanting a cleaning job, you got my number.
Over the hill in the beach town of Ohope, Felicity Joel, who manages the Beach Point Apartments, shows me the view from one of the balconies out over the ocean.
So here we are, straight out to Whakaari, which is always puffing. Apparently the saying goes that if it's not smoking, then we're meant to be worried that it's going to erupt. But it certainly was smoking on the day of the eruption, and it was just suddenly, that's the sort of normal daily smoke. But obviously with the eruption, it was huge, just covered most of the island.
Felicity Joel says they were fortunate the eruption didn't have a big impact on their bookings.
Unlike some of the motels in town where people will come directly for the purposes of going out to White Island, where people mainly coming on holiday and may go to White Island. So from that perspective, we haven't been too directly affected. We had some cancellations. We had the first cancellation I got within sort of an hour of the eruption was a couple that were coming for their wedding anniversary. Their kids had bought them tickets to go to White Island.
The COVID-19 lockdown in March was a different story.
It was beautiful in that we had this beautiful place all to ourselves, but we had, we were fully booked, and so it's 100% cancellations.
But Felicity Joel says Kiwis are taking heed of the call to explore their own backyard in their droves, and bookings are steadily coming in for summer. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
That's all we've got time for this evening. First up, I'll be back with you from 5 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we'll see you in the evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has admitted national security strategic leadership was lacking at the time of last year's Christchurch mosque attacks. The Royal Commission report into the event has found a series of failures, and the minister now coordinating the response, Andrew Little, says intelligence agencies should have been looking wider. And the Police Commissioner has admitted lax oversight of the firearms licensing regime, which did not adequately check the gunman's referees when he got a firearms licence. A computer room at Auckland's Ponsonby Intermediate has been gutted by fire, prompting a large emergency response to stop it spreading to other buildings. About 33 million people in California are under strict new stay-at-home orders following an unprecedented